They say home is where love begins. But for me, home was the first place I learned what it felt like to be unwanted. I was born in the back room of a dusty corner shop my parents owned in a small town that didn't even have streetlights. It smelled of oil, rust, and imported spices. The kind of scent that lingers in your clothes long after you've walked away. My parents called it God's Grace Enterprise, though there was nothing graceful about how we lived. By the time I was 10, I knew what servitude felt like. Not the kind you read about in books, but the kind that starts with a parent's sigh when you walk into a room and another's silence that means you don't deserve an answer. I wasn't beaten often, not in ways that left scars, but I was erased in quieter ways. I was the pair of hands that stocked the shelves, the legs that fetched water, the back that bent when customers came and a parent barked, "Move faster, child!" When other children went to school, I stayed behind the counter, watching their laughter drift down the road like something sacred. I'd trace letters in the dust, forming words I had no teacher to correct. I remember once asking why I couldn't go to school like the rest. The answer was sharp and cruel. "You're needed here," one said. "Education doesn't feed anyone." That sentence locked me in. Every dawn, before the town stirred, I swept the compound, polished bottles, arranged tins in neat rows that nobody noticed. Customers came and went. My parents smiled for them, laughed, and I stood behind the counter, invisible. People said I was lucky to have parents with a business, that at least I had work. I smiled too sometimes, but inside, I was shrinking. The first time I realized they didn't love me the way they claimed was the night I got sick. Fever burned through me like fire, my skin cold, my vision blurred. I asked for help. The reply was, "We can't close the shop. You'll be fine." I was left lying on the floor behind the counter while customers came and went. The hum of voices and the clinking of coins became the lullaby of my despair. That night, I made myself a promise. If I ever lived past this, I'd never let another soul feel that forgotten. A visitor changed my life without meaning to. They were a teacher, one of those rare people who carried light in their eyes. They came into the shop one evening to buy imported chocolate, saw me counting coins, and asked, "Do you go to school?" I shook my head. "Why not?" "My parents say it doesn't feed anyone." They nodded slowly, face soft with something like pity. The next day, they returned, not for chocolate, but with a small exercise book and a pencil. They slid them across the counter. "When you're free," they said, "teach yourself to feed your mind." That night, after everyone slept, I lit a candle stub and began to trace the alphabet on the floor. The candlelight flickered on the tins like a secret watching me learn. I copied words from old newspapers we used to wrap items, words like freedom, mercy, hope. I didn't know then that they would one day become my creed. For 2 years, I studied in shadows. When caught reading, a parent would slap the book from my hands. "Are you trying to become better than us?" they sneered. I didn't answer. I just picked the book back up later, when no one could see. By 15, I was sneaking to the school fence to listen to classes. Sometimes teachers saw me and threw me out. Sometimes they let me sit quietly at the back. And then one day, the teacher caught me again, but this time, they didn't send me away. "If you're serious, I'll talk to the headmaster," they said. The day I stepped into that classroom for the first time felt like entering someone else's dream. Chalk squeaked, children stared, and I sat at the back, heart pounding with both fear and belonging. I learned faster than anyone expected. Maybe hunger sharpens the mind. Maybe silence teaches you to listen better. I graduated top of the district within 3 years. The same people who had watched me sweeping floors now whispered my name with awe. My parents? They said nothing. One simply said, "Don't forget who fed you when you had nothing." When I received a scholarship letter from the university, one parent tried to tear it. "You'll stay here and run this shop," they shouted. "This family needs you." I stood still. For the first time in my life, I said, "No." That single word changed everything. They threw me out that night with only the clothes I wore. I slept on a church bench, clutching the scholarship letter like a passport to another world. At the university, I washed dishes to survive, tutored younger students for small coins, and slept in lecture halls when I couldn't afford rent. Those years built me into something neither parent could have imagined. Someone who knew that love wasn't about blood, it was about kindness freely given. I studied social work and public health. I saw how poverty broke people, how neglect twisted families. I began to organize food drives, mentor children, build small clinics with volunteer doctors. I wasn't rich not then, but people began to notice. A local newspaper wrote about the child who came from dust. Donations came, then grants, then partnerships. By 30, I had founded the Horizon Foundation, helping tens of thousands across rural regions. My parents' shop had long closed. I heard they were struggling, but I couldn't go back. Not yet. I wasn't ready to look at the faces that had once told me I wasn't enough. It took a funeral to bring me home. One parent had passed. A stroke, they said. The other sat alone outside the shop, eyes dim, counters covered in dust. They didn't recognize me at first when I walked up, dressed simply, no entourage, no cameras. Then a whisper, "You came. I thought you forgot us." "I never could," I said. That night, while helping close the shop for the last time, the remaining parent broke down. They told me how regret had eaten them alive, how they had tried to control me because they feared losing me, how pride had rotted into cruelty. "I wanted to keep you close," they said, "but I ended up pushing you away." I didn't answer. I just took their hands, calloused, trembling, and said quietly, "I learned love from everyone except you, but I forgave you long ago." The next morning, I rebuilt the shop into a community center. The same walls that once held me captive now held shelves of free books, bags of rice for widows, a small classroom where children could learn. The signboard no longer read God's Grace Enterprise. Now it read Grace Given, Grace Received. Years later, when the president called to honor me for humanitarian work, I thought of that little shop. I thought of the child sweeping floors while others learned. And as the cameras flashed and the applause thundered, I felt no pride, only a quiet ache. Because I knew there were still countless children behind counters, in streets, in small forgotten towns, waiting for someone to see them. So I spoke, not about myself, but about them. Once I was a child my parents tried to keep as a servant. They called it love, but I learned that real love sets people free. If you're listening, if you have a child, a nephew, a niece, don't tie their wings because you're afraid they'll fly too far. They might just be the wind that lifts your whole name into the sky. The hall went silent. Then applause rose again, thunderous this time, but I wasn't listening. My eyes were wet. Because somewhere in my heart, I was still that child in the shop, counting coins in the dark, whispering to myself that one day I'd be more than what they said. And I was. I found the letter tucked inside the drawer of the community center, the old drawer that had once held the shop's ledgers, now repurposed for supplies and books. The handwriting was shaky, fading with age, and the paper smelled faintly of the tea leaves they used to drink while counting coins I had swept for them. I knew before opening it that it was from them. Somehow, I had always known. They had written it in the quiet of their last days, when the world was soft and still enough to confess what could not be spoken aloud in life. "I never saw you clearly," the letter began. "Not at birth, not at 10, not even at 15 when you first left. I saw only what I wanted to see, a worker to keep my shop running, a shadow to hide behind, a promise I could control. I thought if I tied your hands to our counters and our ledgers, you would never leave. But what I did not see was how you already carried the world inside you." I read on, tears blurring the words. They wrote of the nights they had watched me sleep behind counters, fevered and exhausted, and how the guilt of neglect had gnawed at them quietly, like a slow leak in a jar of oil. They admitted that every harsh word, every denial, every attempt to bind me to the shop had been selfishness disguised as love. "I thought love was ownership," the letter said. "I thought the world was safer if I kept you close, if I bent your dreams to the shape of my fear. I was wrong. Every day I spent trying to control you, I lost sight of who you were meant to be. And yet, even in my blindness, I watched you rise. I watched you build from nothing, lift others from the dust, turn despair into hope. I do not deserve you. But I am proud. I am proud of the person you became when I could not see you. I am sorry for every day I treated you as less than brilliant, less than free, less than worthy of joy." The final lines cut through me with a quiet, aching weight. I cannot ask for your presence. I cannot undo the years of fear and neglect, but I can leave this truth. You were never meant to serve the shop. You were meant to serve the world. You were never meant to be mine alone. Forgive me if you can. Forgive me if you choose. And know this, I loved you in the only way I knew how, and it was never enough. I hope in time that love will feel lighter for you than it did for me. I pressed the letter to my chest and felt something I hadn't felt in years. The quiet, trembling release of grief and understanding intertwined. I whispered almost aloud, I forgive you. I've always forgiven you. And for the first time, it felt true, not because I owed it to them, but because I owed it to myself. Weeks later, I invited the remaining family to Grace Given. They came hesitantly at first, the memory of cold counters and sharper words alive on their faces. But we sat together among the shelves of books, the small classroom, and the bags of rice waiting for the children. I could see them struggling to reconcile the past with the present, the selfishness they had hidden behind, the cruelty they had carried, the love they had buried under fear. I spoke softly, not to lecture, but to share. We cannot undo the past. We cannot return to the counters, the ledgers, the hours of invisibility, but we can choose how we stand now. We can choose to be present. We can choose to lift one another, even if it is only a little. One by one, they reached across the table. One sibling's hand trembled as it met mine. One parent's shoulder quivered as I rested a hand there. It was not perfection. It was not the fairy tale of erased years. It was something harder, something real. The fragile, trembling work of love returned, cautiously but willingly. That night, I walked home under a sky wide and clear. Somewhere a child laughed, chasing another child along a dusty road. The scent of rain lingered in the wind. I carried with me the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. A childhood that had once been stolen, a potential once suppressed, had become a river of help and hope flowing out into the world. The letter, now folded carefully in my pocket, rested against my chest like a pulse. I had once been a shadow behind a counter, unseen, unwanted. Now I was standing in the light, and the people I had loved, even imperfectly, were beginning to step into it with me. I paused on the street, looking up at the sky, and whispered a thought I had never thought I could. I am free. And in that freedom, I felt the quiet, luminous weight of all I had forgiven, and all I had been given back. I woke before dawn, as I had always done. Habit dies slowly. The streets were empty, except for the distant clatter of carts, and the soft, lingering hum of early vendors. I walked past Grace Given, now alive with quiet energy, a few children waiting for their morning porridge, a volunteer doctor setting up the small clinic, a teacher rearranging books that had once been stacked behind dusty counters. I remembered the smell of oil and imported spices from the old shop, how it had clung to my hair, my clothes, my skin. How I had once thought it was all I would ever smell. But now, there was something else. The smell of possibility, of fresh paint, of paper and hope. I inhaled it, letting it fill me in a way that the smell of despair never had. Some days, I let myself sit in the quiet room at Grace Given and read letters from people I had never met. They told me about children who now went to school instead of working behind counters. They told me about widows who had enough food for a week, for a month for the first time in years. They told me about villages where clean water finally ran through pipes instead of waiting for buckets. And I remembered my own childhood, the hands that had been mine, so small, bending to fetch water, to stack tins, to polish bottles that nobody noticed. It struck me again how closely love and cruelty could live side by side. My parents had loved me in the only way they knew how, by holding tight, by controlling, by trying to shape me into something that served them. I had learned, painfully, that love could feel like chains, but I had also learned even more painfully that love could break those chains, that love could be chosen freely, without expectation, without fear. And so I worked. I traveled to remote villages, often alone, sometimes with only a small team of volunteers. I met children who had been left to beg in markets, who had never seen a classroom or a library. I met parents who had never dared to dream that their children could rise. I met elders who whispered blessings to me, as though I were an answer sent from some god I did not know. I listened. I gave. I built. I fell asleep many nights under the stars, listening to the world breathe around me, and for the first time I felt that my own small existence might ripple outward. Letters from my parents became rarer over the years. Their health had waned. Their voices were quieter, their words tinged with hesitation. The letter from my remaining parent, the confession I had read once in tears, remained folded in my pocket, the edges soft from being handled so often. I carried it like a talisman, a reminder of what forgiveness could do. One evening, years later, I returned to Grace Given after a long day of distributing supplies in a flood-affected village. I opened the doors and saw the faces of children reading quietly under the dim lights, a few volunteers cooking dinner in the back. And there, waiting by the front desk, was one of my siblings, someone I had not spoken to in decades. They had aged, but there was still the same hint of hesitation in their eyes that had always made me cautious. They began, voice trembling. I wanted to help. I wanted to see what you've built. I'm sorry for the years I stayed silent, for the years I never stood up when I should have. I closed the door behind me and nodded. It's never too late, I said softly. You're here now. That's what matters. We spent hours talking, sitting among the stacks of books, the bags of rice, the small classrooms that now breathed with life. I told them about my travels, the children I had met, the families I had helped. They told me about their regrets, the nights they had replayed our childhood in their minds, wondering if they had been better, braver, kinder. By the end of the evening, there was a quiet reconciliation, not perfect, not instant, but a fragile thread had been woven. I realized that the years of neglect, the small cruelties and the silences, could not be erased, but they could be acknowledged, and that acknowledgement could create a bridge. The next morning, I walked outside, the sun low on the horizon. Children ran past me, laughing, holding hands, their small feet stirring up dust that shimmered in the light. Somewhere, a young mother whispered thanks, her voice trembling. A teacher called out greetings. Volunteers waved from the small courtyard. And I thought, finally, that the past, the shop, the corners of shadow, the nights of invisibility, had become something else. Not nothing, not erased, but a foundation on which love, freely chosen, could grow. I kept the letter in my pocket that day, the confession of my parent who had tried to hold me back, who had loved me imperfectly, who had feared losing me so much that they tried to clip my wings. I pressed it lightly against my chest and whispered into the morning air, I forgive you. I am free, and I will keep flying. The children's laughter rose around me, and I realized that what I had once been, the invisible child behind counters, the one they tried to bury, had become a river of hope. I was not just surviving. I was building, teaching, lifting, and finally, forgiving. And somehow, even in their absence, my parents' flawed love had carried me to this moment of grace. I turned toward the horizon, watching the sun rise over the town that had once tried to hold me small. For the first time in my life, I felt a quiet, whole joy. The world was vast, the tasks unending, and yet I was exactly where I was meant to be. And in that clarity, I knew. The child they tried to bury had become a light too wide to be contained. This could now be expanded into full-length 8,000